G'day folks, my name is Rob, welcome back to another F1 Fantasy video. Today we're looking at my team selection for race week 10 ahead of the Austrian Grand Prix coming up this weekend. As always, if you enjoy the content, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Getting very close to the very small subscriber milestone of 1,000, so thank you to all of you that have already subscribed to the channel and engaged with this content on a regular basis. So we're going to take a look at how my team did. First of all, in the Grand Prix just gone, we had 275 points all out. A pretty solid week. Nothing too out of the ordinary. Max once again coming through with the goods. 35 points, 70 as DRS boost. Alonso had 27. Perez matched him just about, although very different stories in terms of qualifying and race. Alonso had a very good weekend across the board. Another podium in the books for the Aston Martin driver. Perez, however, had a pretty poor qualifying on the Saturday. We've seemed to have become accustomed to a little bit of that from him lately, but managed to make up a number of places on the race day to finish in 6th. Quite a few overtakes, positions gained, and the fastest lap bonus obviously helped his points total as well. So pretty solid outing for the Red Bull guys in terms of fantasy production. Lance Stroll, another one that I'd brought back into my team after a week on the sidelines in favour of Pierre Gasly. He delivered with 14 points and obviously had a couple of extra overtakes assigned to him, which boosted up his points by I think about 5 or so, and that also meant rank slightly increased, not by much, but an increase nonetheless to 148,000, up from 152 I think it was. So pretty good there. Joe was the obvious blemish on the solid race week, 4 points. I mean, this budget driver situation is a luck of the draw at the moment. He had a pretty good, from a fantasy perspective, qualifying with literally the last car on the grid, and still managed to make up a bunch of places on Sunday. So compared to the output of other drivers like Alex Albon in particular and Yuki Tsunoda, not a great result comparably, but again, you know, if it's not a DNF, then I can't really complain too much. So I want to, you know, I think pretty solid across the board. Those guys that had Albon in particular really thrived. And we're going to take a look at him as an option heading into Austria. If we take a look at my team, this is currently as it is. As many of you know who have paid close attention to the game since the conclusion of the Canadian Grand Prix, we did see quite a number of hefty price rises that a lot of drivers and constructors were subject to. The obvious ones were Aston Martin and Red Bull. They've been well overdue for a price increase. As I touched on in my initial knee-jerk reaction video last week, I think the adjustments are still going to continue heading into the next few weeks as F1, I guess, respond to our gripes with the pricing structure, and Red Bull's obviously seen some marginal increases across the board comparably as well. So for those of you that were tripled up on both teams, some rewards no doubt, but unfortunately there are quite a number of you as well that opted for drivers like George Russell, who's subject to a $0.5 million drop. And I think realistically for the Canadian Grand Prix, Russell was a great option. I really had an eye on him. I wasn't so convinced that he was a better option than Perez, and obviously the DNF didn't help Russell's case, not to mention Perez's 10 points for the fastest lap probably rubbed a little bit of salt into the wound, but I think Russell still remains an option for the wider template going forward. But as far as, say, Alonso, Verstappen, Red Bull, Aston Martin are concerned, they're not going anywhere just because of how undervalued they are at the moment. Lance Stroll, another one that obviously went up 0.5. Just because we're not quite sure yet what F1 Fantasy are going to do with these price adjustments moving forward, it seems likely that a lot of people that are stuck with a team like the one I've got on the screen here may well just see that out for the next few weeks until we have a fairer idea of what these adjustments are going to look like. I guess as far as frequency is concerned, as far as value is concerned, 1 week isn't really a lot to form a view on that at the moment. So just wait and see how that goes. As far as what my team is looking like, as I mentioned, because of these price rises, I think you'll see a lot of people just stick with this team. I'm very likely to as well, and I did have Tsunoda on my list before Canada. Unfortunately now, because of him going up 0.5 million, I'm not sure why Joe didn't move. I can't afford him by 0.2, which frustrates the hell out of me a little bit, actually. Uh, so I'm likely to stick with this team for 2 weeks in a row. The three guys below, just not at all what I'm interested in. Hulkenberg still seems to lose positions. Nick De Vries and Logan Sargent, really kind of disappointing still in their rookie season. So you kind of just by process of elimination left with the only other guy in that price bracket, which is Joe for me. Again, he has done a number of overtakes. That's made him a popular pick below 5 million. But now with Tsunoda and Albon going up by 0.5 and 1 million respectively, unless you're able to get to them, it doesn't seem likely that they're viable at the moment. The only other alternative I would consider, and this would be for people who probably haven't been hurt by the George Russell price decrease, is to go for someone like George Russell. He has obviously had that DNF in Canada. The Mercedes is pretty reliable for the most part. That's his second of the season, unfortunately. Hamilton has had none. But if you, for whatever reason, didn't get hit with that 0.5, you could probably move to a team like a Russell-Tsunoda combination down here. Tsunoda, I think, looks particularly good in that AlphaTauri, as I've talked about. With the upcoming sprint weekend, he did get hit with a DNF at Baku, as did just about every other budget driver. I think Hulkenberg might have been the only budget driver that didn't DNF in either the sprint or the Sunday race. So kind of hard to say that trend's going to continue heading into the second sprint, but I do like Tsunoda's pace in a car that's otherwise pretty slow off the mark. Russell, you kind of know what you're getting from him. Unfortunately, the DNF, as I said, not ideal, but I can't see that happening 2 weekends in a row unless there's an unforeseen incident that occurs. So I think this is another pretty solid team. I still prefer the Perez build at the moment, and that I think protects anyone that opts for him against any price increases that Red Bull I still think are going to see heading into the next few weeks. It might only be by 0.2, 0.3 every week, but again, still not price rises I'm willing to miss out on at the moment, particularly if we do find that results from more than just the previous week come into effect. So you might see a delayed price lag decrease for George Russell where he goes down another 0.2 because the average of his scores over the last 2 or 3 weeks means that it's going to result in a decrease. Again, I'm speculating here, but I definitely think for me and my team value at the moment, given I don't really have much else to move towards in that budget category, it's probably going to look something like this for the sprint. As far as the sprint is concerned, Max Verstappen for me is a front runner for the extra DRS boost, just because of how strong his record is at the Red Bull Ring. I did quote his results earlier this week. I'll just come down here to a previous tweet of mine. Red Bull, as we know so far, the most dominant car on the circuit. Max has had a great start to the year, 5 wins in his first 7. And at this circuit alone, he's had 4 wins in his last 7, as well as a bunch of fastest laps and pole positions. So it just seems a very obvious choice to activate this chip for this weekend. I can see why people may not want to use it so swiftly. And one reason would be you could time a sprint race weekend with a grid penalty, whether that's on Max or another top team driver like Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, etc. The reason why I'm leaning towards Austria at the moment is just because there's still such a gulf between Red Bull and the rest of the teams. I do wonder later in the year, once we see more upgrade packages, more reliability concerns as engines start to fail, which obviously might open the door for grid penalties. But that aside, it might just mean that the Red Bull is a little bit more exposed compared to where it is right now. Max hasn't yet wrapped up the championship either, so I wonder if it gets to later in the year, does that mean he's a little bit more complacent? I doubt it, but again, given we don't have that information available to us right now, I'm not going to presume it's going to be something else than what we're seeing right now. And I think I really just like how strong Max has been to start the year off. So extra DRS boost, I think, a very popular pick for this weekend. And if I go back to a previous tweet of mine as well, I've mapped out kind of some chip usage thoughts for the rest of the season. I looked at Austria, Qatar, Brazil. I've got Spa here as well, and I left off Austin. I've thought about that a little bit more, and that could potentially be an option for autopilot later in the year, or even limitless. But The reason why I like Limitless is just because for Qatar anyway, there's a lower rain risk, and we might see more of those grid penalties among the top teams that promote differentials. Say like Lewis Hamilton, for example, low owned, but if he has something like that later in the year, then he'd be an awesome pick for that race. And obviously, with the low rain risk, it reduces the likelihood of a DNF. So when you're activating these kind of chips, you need to be sure or pretty certain that the risk of a DNF or any issues are going to be as low as possible. And I think that's why I like Limitless in Qatar. As for Brazil, again, you could use it at Spa if you think the unpredictable weather is also another reason. But I think because there's going to be more drivers challenging for wins later in the year, that's probably why there's going to be a bit more variance on the podium finish, etc. So as far as that's concerned, that's kind of where my head's at. I will just bring up on the screen here kind of my rehashed thoughts of the chip usage. I did have a chip usage video I released a number of weeks ago where I mapped out when I thought the best times, most optimal times to use these chips would be. I've tweaked my strategy just a little bit. The only consistent one is the extra DRS boost in Austria. That hasn't changed, and I've kind of been on that since the start of the year because of the Red Bull. So that stays where it is. Again, no negative, not one that is a priority for me right now, but I think I want to use it at a non-sprint weekend street circuit, and Singapore stands out to me as a circuit like that would work. We had a bunch of DNFs last year. If we go to the race classification, 6 DNFs from a bunch of drivers in midfield teams. And because of obviously those midfield issues, the midfield and budget driver issues where they're just not going to score points, or certainly not as many points on Saturday, it opens the door for finishing with negative points on the Sunday. So I think Singapore would be a very optimal time to use that. Again, very far down the line. I'm not suggesting right now it's locked in, but I think it's an option for sure. And then as for what have we got here? Wildcard in Japan. I did initially have that right after the mid-season break. I still think that's an option, but again, I think it could work quite nicely where you wildcard into a team, then Limitless the following week at Qatar, as I mentioned. And hopefully, because it's a sprint race, you might think that the drivers you pick on that wildcard, you kind of not only hoping that they do well in Japan, but they also increase in value after the Qatar sprint race because there are going to be more points on offer, and then you ride those prizes into the sprint race in the United States at Austin. So something I've just thought about, again, not locked in at all, but I think that could work quite nicely. The Limitless in Qatar, and then that leaves us with the autopilot in Brazil, as I said. Again, you could kind of mix and match when you want to use autopilot, but I think, again, Brazil, because it's got a bit of rain risk there, you could certainly activate it then. Or Belgium, again. Very much all up in the air, but just wanted to get some thoughts down because obviously chip usage season is getting closer. So that's kind of where my head's at. There's nothing for Final Fix. I use that in Monaco to no avail. So I haven't got that on the screen there, but again, that's very much dependent on your team and when or how you want to use that. So that's kind of where my team is at for the week ahead. If we go back to the team selection, that's kind of where I'm shaping up at. I think realistically that's what it's going to look like for Austria. Max on the triple DRS, and then I haven't decided whether I want to go Perez or Alonso for the 2 times. Alonso's form looks really good at the moment. Perez not so much, so just want to see how that goes. If we see the pace from Perez in practice, then maybe I go with him like 2 times. It's probably for me the lower risk, but again, undecided. So we'll see how things look in the lead up to the race. But I think that'll be all for me today. Just wanted to share with you my thoughts on team selection. I might be back with the final thoughts. The deadline this week is on the Friday because we have qualifying on the Friday with the sprint on the Saturday. So be sure to keep an eye on your team a little earlier than normal. I'll, as I said, try and be back with final thoughts, but otherwise stay tuned on my Twitter. I'll have my weekly race preview thread out then. And yeah, all the best of luck with this upcoming week, guys. Thanks for watching as always, and I'll see you all very soon.